for the last 20 years or so, the Star Trek novels, mostly those set in the 24th century, so Next
Mhm.
Generation, Deep Space Nine, Voyager, and some original series such as Titan, um, have had interconnected continuity. They've been telling stories that weave in and out of the various series, and events that happen in one book are carried forward and acknowledged in other books. And so they've been building this very complicated, interconnected storyline for about 20 years through many dozens of books by a couple of dozen different authors. And so we had this good thing going. I mean, once the shows went off the air and Nemesis sort of finished its thing in 2002, suddenly there was this open field. The 24th century was up for grabs.
Mhm.
And at the time, it didn't seem like there was anything coming down the pike that was going to deal with those characters or that era of Star Trek again. So we just got permission from CBS to take the ball and run with it. So we did. And we've had a pretty good run for about 20 years. But a couple of years ago, it became known to some of us behind the scenes that Picard was in the works.
Mhm.
And given its setting in 2399, right at the end of the 24th century, it was very likely that it was going to establish details about the late 24th century that were going to conflict with and very likely be irreconcilable with those that we had established in our long running literary continuity.
Mhm.
Now, one of the rules of tie ins is you have to be consistent with the canon as it exists at the time your books are written. And as a result, we knew that as as Discovery was moving into the future and establishing new details, as Picard was reestablishing details about the late 24th century, eventually we were going to have to wind down and let go of this interconnected continuity. And we said there's two ways we can go about it. We can either simply abandon the storylines we've been working on with really no closure, or we can try to do one last hurrah, one last storyline that we try to tie off as many of those loose ends as we can, and also let our characters go out heroically, albeit perhaps tragically, uh, doing something where they basically have to acknowledge that their timeline, their version of Star Trek's reality, is coming to an end. In that respect, it's kind of a metatextual exercise where the characters are going through the same angst and
Yep.
agony as those of us who created them. And we opted for the latter. Essentially, we chose to steer into the wave. And thus we birthed CODA, which is this notion of a temporal apocalypse, an unraveling of timelines, the multiverse. And our characters find out that this has been going on for some time, and they are just now getting hit by it. And as they investigate further, they figure out which species, which culture is behind it, why they're doing it. And as they get to book 3, my book, which comes out on November 30th, Oblivion's Gate, they're going to find out the role that they inadvertently played in bringing it all and making it all happen. That they actually are partially, indirectly culpable for having brought about the temporal apocalypse. And therefore, it kind of falls on their shoulders at any cost to make it right. Even if they can't save themselves, they have to try and save countless other realities, because if they fall, if they don't do something now, infinite numbers of other realities will suffer. They have a chance to basically stop the damage here, basically make their deaths count for something. But it's going to be a long shot, and it's going to require a lot of luck. And so they obviously take on the dangerous mission of, let's die for a reason. If we're going to die, let's go out with some meaning. And that's what it's about.
Wow.
Uh,
We all got so quiet there. Like we were
Yeah.
captive, right? There was so much going on there. That's amazing. I don't know.
And as my co-writer on the project, one of them, James Swallow, has said very eloquently, on a more meta level, what CODA is about. It's about aging. It's about facing the inevitability of death. And it's about sort of realizing that the only way your life has meaning is the meaning you impose upon it. That if we don't work to actively give our lives meaning, they won't have any. Life is meaningless if you simply allow it to wash over you. Existence is meaningless. Life, choosing to live, is what creates meaning. And so that's sort of the more thematic idea behind CODA.
David, does that allow for a future wave of storylines that you're now having a blank slate, so you can weave in the new stuff and start a whole nother tapestry?
Yeah, the idea is that this is going to pretty much bring to a close these many different stories that we've been doing for the last 20 years, and that when we're done, the books that are going to continue to come out, because there will be new Star Trek books, the line will continue, but the new books are going to be more closely aligned with and based upon the new TV shows. So we're going to see books that are strictly based in the Picard continuity. We're going to see Discovery novels that are set in this new 32nd century timeline. We're going to see books based on Strange New Worlds. And as always, there'll be classic Trek novels set during the time of the series. So you'll see Deep Space Nine novels from time to time that are set during the run of show. You'll see original series novels, just like we always have. Next Generation novels, again, set during the time of the original series, the TV series. What we're not going to see is probably more stories connected to the ones we've been doing for the last 20 years in that post-finale period. That's sort of all going to get reset. And if we do stories set during that time period, they're going to be specifically connected to the storylines of Picard, the storylines of Discovery, etc. We're going to try and keep a focus now on books in the future being more closely connected to the new shows.
Mm-hmm. It's got to be so tough, though, because theoretically, right, I mean, as they say, the books are not canon. They're as close to canon as you can be, obviously, especially to us fans. But so when something on screen, which is canon, kind of in a way retcons or at least gives you an endpoint to where you know that at some point it's going to have to go back to this. Picard is going to have to be at this place at this time in this state. And you kind of have to do these gymnastics and weave around to either make it connect to that, or in this case, the three of you found a way to, it seems like, hit the reset button.
Well, we hate the reset button because that was the dreaded term for when you had to have a story have no consequences at the end. And
right,
the end,
it was all a dream thing, right?
Yeah. Essentially what we were doing here is we realized that there was no way to reconcile what Picard was establishing about that period of time with what we'd already done. The books had already reached a period in time where it was Federation calendar 2386 going toward 2387. Mm-hmm. And suddenly Picard establishes that in 2384 or 2385, that's when the whole incident on Mars happened. Mars went up in flames, the AI rebellion, thousands of lives lost. There's this huge event, and then suddenly there's the whole evacuation of Romulus, and all this other stuff is going on. And we realized we're playing years past this. We can't just now try to go back and retroactively drop in the Mars continuity because it doesn't work. It doesn't match anything we've done. At that point, I mean, even before the show came out, we knew we were in trouble. I was in contact with Kirsten Beyer, and of course, Dayton Ward, who at that time had just started working with Star Trek licensing, was also in touch with Kirsten. He was seeing scripts. I was getting sort of the behind the scenes making of scuttlebutt. Dayton was seeing the scripts. And we had to sort of both compartmentalize our information. And he and I both started thinking independently around the same time, we're going to have to find a way to wrap up what we're doing in the books. We have to find a way to do it. So I had this notion that I started cooking up, and I eventually pitched it to James Swallow. He was in New York City for a weekend for a convention. And I said, hey, if you got a free afternoon, my friends are having a 4th of July barbecue out in Jersey. We could pick you up and we'll talk story. And so we went out, we had some burgers, we had some brisket, we had some beers, and we talked Trek. And eventually I won him over. And then I took the idea that he and I had cooked up with a little help from Keith DeCandido and my buddy Glenn Howman. And a couple weeks later at Shore Leave Convention in Baltimore, I sat down with Dayton and I pitched him my idea, and he said, you and I are so close as you're not going to believe it. He says, however, I have to warn you, dude, it is so much worse than you think. And then he starts telling me about some of the details that I didn't know about. And I was like, oh man, how are we going to deal with that? He goes, well, I got some ideas. And then he sort of lays it out for me and he says, so we'd have to do this and this. He says, so how far did you think, we were going to have to fix this? I said, probably up to this point. He goes, think bigger. I'm like, all right. So that was how that conversation went. But it was, we knew right away that we were never going to be able to make this fit with that. It's a square peg in a round hole. They were never going to go together. So we have to find a way to let the square peg sort of vanish into the ether.
So, David, my understanding is the first book focuses heavily on the TNG folks and the second on Deep Space Nine. So is yours, is it okay to say, because I know it's not released yet, is yours going to basically bring us up to date on Janeway and all these folks too more?
No, Voyager is not really part of the CODA trilogy to any large degree. A few Voyager characters are involved because they were left on Earth. Paris and Torres are both part of book 2.
Okay.
Tuvok is part of the Titan crew, which is part of all 3 books. So there is representation of Voyager characters.
Okay.
However, because Kirsten Beyer had done so much work in her Voyager novels, with the Full Circle fleet and their mission in the Delta Quadrant, and then eventually a mission that takes them out of the galaxy into the void, on a journey to another galaxy. She had left this in a very hopeful place. She had her characters just sort of going off and doing something spectacular, and that was how she left it. And that's how she wanted us to leave it. So out of respect for what Kirsten had done, we said, all right, Voyager's hands off. And at her request and the request of the editors, certain elements from Voyager that people previously assumed were going to be a big part of this, they said, oh, you must be using the Krenim. No. We were actually asked specifically not to use the Krenim. So we didn't touch them. I think they get a passing mention maybe in book 2. But so book 3 really is, we're going to pick up with the characters who are all together at the end of book 2, and there's a line, a lot of people have been talking about this online, where they're on the run. They're being hunted by Riker, who we've now cast in the role of the Admiral. And he's chasing them, and they need a place to hide. They need a place to regroup. And Bashir, who in the books has had some additional adventures in the mirror universe, says, I know a place we can hide, a place where I have allies. We have to go through the mirror. Mm-hmm. And essentially, it's going to open up in book 3. Book 3 is going to be the transition. Our characters are going to seek refuge. They're going to seek asylum, sanctuary, if you will, in the mirror universe with the Galactic Commonwealth, which I established in Rise Like Lions, which was my mirror universe revolution book, which we've seen a couple of times since then in and I think in a Section 31 novel I wrote called Disavowed. That was when Bashir made the crossing again, went back. Mm-hmm. So the mirror universe is very different from where we left it in DS9. We've carried forward the Terran Revolution storyline and have radically changed the status quo in the mirror universe by this point. So that's where our characters are heading. Meanwhile, the Titan crew has to figure out what is scrambled in Riker's brain and try to get him back on track. And there's a few other subplots that I don't want to spoil. I want to let people discover them when the book comes out.
What was the I did a lot of reading of the Titan series. There was I was glad you mentioned Tuvok is still a part of that. I don't know how far beyond the Titan series this is, but there was also an unjoined Trill male tactical officer.
Ranul Karu?
Yeah,
he's the chief of security.
Right.
He I think originally at the beginning of the Titan series, he was romantically involved, I think, with character Hawk, Lieutenant Hawk from First Contact, and then Hawk dies. This traumatizes Karu, but eventually Karu finds a new partner who he's happy with, who he is domestically shacked up with aboard the Titan. They have a relationship, and it's not any drama at all. They're just happy together. Awesome. Ranul Karu, unjoined Trill, is there. I think he's with a transporter officer named Bowen Radowski, if I remember correctly.
I remember that.
So that's who he's with, and so that's what's going on with the Titan. Wow. And as far as where we are chronologically, this picks up maybe, I don't know, a couple of months or maybe a few months after the last previous Titan novel, which was my novel, Fortune of War.
Okay.